members, so CB5. Present. CB6.
Present.
CB7. Present. CB8. CB9 is here. Present. CB10. Present. Don't see 11, 12, but I know that one is going to be joining us shortly. All right, calling the meeting to order. Can I get a motion to adopt today's agenda, please? Second. Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Can I also have a motion to adopt the meeting minutes from the previous month?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Seeing all ayes. I'm happy, Keisha, if you're ready to give the borough president's report.
Sure thing. Excuse me. Don't have this ready. Good morning, everyone. It's may feel like a dreary day, but it's one that we really need with this rain, with this drought situation we have going. I'm thrilled to be here, share a couple of notes. Starting with the leadership training series, I'm so grateful, frankly, to Eric and Porfirio who put together our leadership training series. And thank you so much to all of you for really spreading the word. And of course, attending the recent week of leadership training series. With your help, we were able to provide training on land use, housing finance, managing open data, and to the newer and the more veterans members, everyone was able to receive this information. We also had a new training this year, which was a big hit, understanding housing finance, but also the leadership transition training that was done last Monday, I think that was, yes, which we took on in order to help, and this was thank you to Eric again, but in order to help boards with their leadership transition in anticipation of term limits coming along. So moving on, we have been releasing in phases the MBPO Senior Resource Guide. Our elder New Yorkers have built a city that we know and love. I take my elders very, very seriously. They've obviously spent their lifetimes contributing, their wisdom and experience and so forth to our lives. And with that in mind, the MBPO is proud to release our Senior Resource Guide to help ensure that Manhattanites can age in place comfortably, live their independent lives, and of course do so in the communities that they love. It's a 50+ page comprehensive guide that's designed to help seniors. There's information, around where senior centers are, health and nutrition information, transportation, housing, legal assistance. The guide is actually up on our website. We are printing a very limited number of copies to give to the senior centers because it's such a hefty resource. We're giving them to the senior centers, but if you can, please let people know that they are at our senior centers, and that the guide is actually on the website. It's on the website in two forms for those who, are comfortable with kind of the filtering system, or maybe may have another person in their lives who's more comfortable with the filtering system.
Airtable nerds.
Yes, for the Airtable nerds, exactly. So yes, exactly. You guys know it because it's based in Airtable. But some of us may not be able to be as proficient in the Airtable, may have somebody else in our families who's a little more technologically savvy. It's available there, and it's also available in the PDF form, so you can buy CB, so you can actually, once you know what community board you're in, you can look for the resources that are available in your community board. Moving on, we are excited to be launching the Manhattan Future Leaders Fellowship. Last year, we piloted this program under a slightly different name. And we're excited we feel like we have refined the program in a way that will really work better and work well for our young people. It's for high school juniors and seniors. Will help them develop their, obviously, leadership skills, learn about New York City government, learn about all of the, the inner workings of this office, develop communication skills, learn about policy, et cetera, et cetera. It is, let's see, the deadline to apply is December 1st. That is also on our website. And we're really, we've gotten some applications. We're still trying to get the word out. So we really appreciate it. If you'd help get the word out to everybody in your community boards, in your districts rather, so that we can get a robust pool of applicants. Do you have a question?
Yeah, one question. How long is the fellowship?
It is a spring semester fellowship. So they have monthly meetings with monthly virtual meetings in the evenings with NBPO staff. And then there are several activities. One might call them field trips, but not really field trips. That's what for younger people, they do field trips. But no, visiting City Hall, visiting the Museum of the City of New York to, take in what there is to learn about the city and its inner workings there. So there are, and frankly, those activities are meant to expose them, but also to build a sense of fellowship amongst them, so that they really feel the cohort and are able to build a cohort that they will, have with them for, the rest of their lives. That's, part of what we're trying to achieve is that they are able to, bond, if you will. So please get the word out about.
Seeing on the website where maybe I'm
somebody-
not
Sure.
on meeting. Or can you guys send a link after?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
happy to.
Would be delighted to do that, and hopefully maybe Eric can tell us exactly where it is. And then moving on, we are in the midst of holidays. We've done, I think we have a total of probably, I think it's exploded. Our Thanksgiving our Thanksgiving turkey, pernil and grocery, pernil and grocery giveaways. We are continuing to get, as of yesterday, more stuff, and we're growing, so that we've been doing more and more of these giveaways. I think it started out at 11. I think it's going to be way more than that. We did one yesterday up at our Northern Manhattan office in partnership with Hunts Point, giving away many bags of groceries. We are continuing to do that as we move into the holiday season. And so we're continuing to seek volunteers. And so all of we have a volunteer corps on the website. It's the volunteer, one can sign up for the MVPO volunteer corps, which Keisha Smith manages on our website. And because we will always love to have more hands packaging groceries, packaging, all the things, and helping to lift heavy turkeys to get them out.
On the site, there are the dates and times, the locations of the giveaways, so that we can share that information.
So each of the giveaways, we are partnering. I'm not sure if they're all on the website.
I don't think they're all on the website.
Yeah.
We do have flyers for some upcoming ones from our special events team. I'm happy to get those flyers and send them out, as well as the link for the fellowship.
So people in need can.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Actually, access. Yeah, thanks.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. We've done them in partnerships, and certain, we're obviously very focused on ensuring that we're doing them in the neighborhoods where there's a greatest need and so forth. But so that's it. So we will be happy to get those flyers out to you. And that concludes my remarks. Good morning, guys.
All right. Thank you so much, Keisha. I think with that, I'll add a few more folks here. So Jessica, thank you for being here, and Andrea and Xavier as well. So roll. I will pass it on to our presenter. So I don't know how much of an introduction I should give, but if you guys already hopefully know Sean, good to reconnect with Sean. He's going to be presenting on behalf of the MTA capital plan with updates. And Sean, I can pass you this and I will share presentation.
Excellent. Yeah, wonderful to be here. Thank you all for having me. Excited to talk through what has been a very eventful couple of weeks for the MTA capital plan. And so it's a good moment to check in, let you know sort of some of the recent updates and also what's coming soon as we move into our next capital plan. We do these 5-year capital plans, sort of created by Dick Ravitch in the 1980s as a way of making sure that on a consistent basis, the MTA was laying out what it needs in order to continue to operate, and that there's an opportunity to, secure that funding and ensure that system's able to keep moving. So, I think this is a group that probably wouldn't disagree with the concept that there is no New York without transit. It is essential to the economic vitality of the region. It's critical in terms of the affordability of the region, especially as sort of affordability is a challenge throughout the city and beyond. We did some analysis, found that it's 8 times cheaper to use public transit to get around in the New York region than it is to own an automobile. And that's obviously a very important point given the housing challenges folks have. And it's an important part of our sustainability. New York is the greenest region in the country. And that's driven to a large extent by the 20 million tons of carbon that the MTA keeps out of the atmosphere every year by folks using our greener services as opposed to driving, and the sort of density that supports as well. So we're, for all these reasons, we think it's important to continue to maintain our system, because there's no New York without transit, there's no transit without capital investment. This is a sort of not very subtle find the difference graphic that we put together as part of our 20-year needs assessment last year. And what I like about it, and the reason I put it in the presentation, is because every single thing that is different between the two sides, whether it's the rail car, the really obvious things like the rail cars, the station conditions, whether there are elevators or not, as well as some of the subtler back of house things like the condition of our communications equipment, some of the waterproofing, are all things that are addressed through capital investment, and so that require significant consistent investment in order to both maintain what we have and improve it. This is comes at a time where we are building on recent successes. The 2020 to 2024 capital plan that we're in the midst of now was a really historic investment, was a break from a cycle of disinvestment. Sort of coming out of the subway action plan and the summer of hell. Folks remember what the trains were like in 2016, 2017. We've been able to make a lot of investment since then. Obviously, with last week's news that congestion pricing is moving forward, we now have a fully funded 2020 to 24 capital plan. I think there's obviously a lively discussion about the program itself from the MTA construction and development perspective. It was essential for 23 accessibility projects, the 2nd Avenue subway extension into East Harlem, 2 major signal modernization lines on the Fulton line in Brooklyn and the 6th Avenue BD F&M trains in Manhattan to be able to move forward. And so we're thrilled that funding is now in place, and a lot of these projects are going to start moving pretty fast and furious now that we have sort of a secure ability to actually pay for them. So that leads to I think an important point, which is that this is an important congestion pricing is an important project. It's certainly an important source of funding for us. It doesn't mean that the work is done, and so there is as we move in these 5-year cycles. The timing is such that we are now approaching the 2025 to 2029 capital plan period. And so that moves into, figuring out what's next and making sure that the system is able to continue to operate and that we're able to continue to improve and expand it. That started last year with a 20-year needs assessment that we did. It was, if folks haven't taken a look at it, I'd encourage you to do so. It really is the most comprehensive review of the MTA's physical assets that has ever been conducted, certainly ever been published. We put data on nearly 6 million assets throughout the entire MTA portfolio together, rating each of them on a scale of 1 to 5 and determining what's in what the Federal Transit Administration calls poor or marginal condition, just to say what needs sort of investment in the relatively near future. The results of that were, not surprising for sort of folks who use the system and understand its sort of scale and age, but were pretty sobering in terms of the amount of investment that will be needed to modernize the system. 2,000 rail cars are beyond their useful life. This 53% of stations on Metro North's Harlem line are in poor and marginal condition. We have, in fact, several stations on the Harlem line that have portions of the platform that are closed because they're not structurally sound. And a lot of the back of house things that customers don't see, shouldn't need to think about unless something goes wrong, are also sort of in a very vulnerable state. More than a third of substations that power the subway are in poor and marginal condition. For our commuter railroads, that number is actually worse. And so, we're at this time where service has improved significantly in the last 10 years. But we recognize that if we don't make investments in this, in the actual physical infrastructure behind that service, we run the risk of falling backwards again. And so that's what this plan proposes to do, is to address that backlog of state of good repair needs, and do it in a sort of responsible, right-sized way. I think we recognize that it wouldn't be possible to sort of completely eliminate every backlog in the entire system in one 5-year period, even if money were no object, and it clearly is not no object. Even if that were the case, we couldn't shut the system down and sort of do that much disruption in one 5-year period. So what we're proposing to do, and these charts there's a slightly more technical version of it that you'll find in the plan book itself. But what they're meant to represent is at the end of our current plan, what percentage of our assets in a given category will be in a state of good repair. And then the darker blue in the sort of right side of the bar is showing what we're going to address in this plan. And what's important is that we also have the darker red, which is a recognition of the fact that in 5 years' time, it will be 5 years later, and another cohort of assets will have aged out, will need to be addressed. And so what we're trying to do in sort of across the board, and I think we've sized the plan to achieve this, is to move us forward, take us in an achievable way towards a state of good repair and stay ahead of the decay curve, we call it, the projected decay that we know will come with the continued passage of time. And so from everything from those substations in particular, our elevator replacements, the signals themselves, the structures, our goal is to, have an ambitious plan, but one we can achieve and one that, moves us in the right direction. We also looked at, so that's sort of how we built the plan from the bottom up. We did also do some gut checks to make sure we were arriving at a number that seemed logical or palatable. We had JP Morgan do an analysis of what private sector entities that own large physical plants comparable to the MTA's $1.5 trillion asset base. Look like things like freight railroads, utility companies, airlines, auto companies, places that own, multi-$100 billion physical industrial plants. And what they found was that the private sector would invest on average something like $16 billion a year in the capital maintenance of their physical assets. And factoring in the fact that we have not, over the course of the last decades, averaged $16 billion a year or anything close to it, they would recommend a sort of catch up of $23 billion a year to sort of get us on that path to state of good repair. We're not proposing to hit that number. We're not proposing a $125 billion 5-year plan, but this was an important gut check for us of sort of what what a serious financial analysis would show of our physical system. We also relied on independent reviews from folks like the state comptroller. Actually, the Citizens Budget Commission did a very similar analysis, estimating our needs for the next 5 years of anywhere between $60 and $90 billion. We're coming on sort of the low medium end of that range, and that felt like a helpful validation from a very serious observer of our system.
Make them even larger. Sure. I promise I got my glasses on.
Yeah.
Is that a little better?
You might be able to full screen.
Yeah.
It's hidden by.
Let's
see. Is that a little better?
And then,
would it be possible to get a copy of you?
Absolutely, yes. Happy to. Eric has this. I'm sure he can add this to his email list at the end. And
one slide.
yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, and then one other factor to keep in mind is that, as folks have experienced in their personal lives, there has been substantial inflation since the last plan was put together. In the construction industry in New York in particular, it's been almost 30% over the last 5 years. That has cooled significantly, which is encouraging. And I think we've done we did a very, a lot of contractors came to us in the last couple of years asking for adjustments. We've been pretty good at, holding them to their quotes and, keeping sort of guarding the public's dollars aggressively, but there's just no way to sort of completely avoid the impact of inflation on construction. So all of that leads to a proposed 25 to 29 capital plan that is $65.4 billion between New York City Transit, the buses, which are sometimes accounted for separately, the Long Island Railroad Metro North, and then our interagency work and expansion projects, as well as $3 billion for our bridges and tunnels group, which is self-funded through their toll revenue. What's notable here is that, and this is by far the biggest number in recent memory, more than 90% of this is dedicated to our existing system. So this isn't, a plan that is focused on nice to have expansion projects. The focus is on rebuilding and improving the existing system that we have, more than 90% of that. So I'll run through some of the highlights of what's in the plan, and I'm happy to answer questions as we get into it. There's a ton of work to do. We've tried to organize it into three main buckets. One is to provide frequent and reliable service. This really is the touchstone for that state of good repair work, both the things customers see and the things behind the scenes that they don't, that are necessary in order for us to, continue to provide service and improve it. We talk about improving the customer experience. That's really a place to talk about our station work, both improving the accessibility of our station, the state of good repair work to actually keep our station standing, keep entrances open, deal with 100 years of wear and tear and water infiltration and all the things that impact the appearance and structural soundness of our stations. As well as tackling fare evasion and trying to take on the accessibility of entering the system, both for good, making it more accessible for folks with mobility challenges, and preventing fare evasion. And finally, taking action on climate change, which as we've experienced in recent years, is sort of not optional. Our system is not designed for the climate. It was designed for the climate of 100 years ago, and that's less and less what we experience today. So the need to address challenges like sea level rise in coastal areas and flash flooding that we see sort of throughout the region. Going the wrong way, but. So in terms of frequent and reliable service, I'll run through slides on a couple of these, but this really, again, is looking at the infrastructure we need to keep things running. A centerpiece of that is an investment in new rail cars like the R211 pictured on the A line. You may see it on the A and C lines today. This is a great sort of history lesson of the capital plan, which is when Dick Ravitch took over in the 1980s and created the MTA capital plan. One of the great challenges was the state of our rail cars. They were these pre-World War II cars that were failing on average every 5,000 miles, the mean distance between failure, we call it. He was able to replace them, and this massive wave of investment came in, and these new cars really were the symbol of the sort of revival of the subway system. Their mean distance between failure was something like 125,000 miles. Today, our best cars get 250,000 miles between needing to go into the shop. Those cars, the R62 and R68, so the technical term, essentially anywhere you see orange seats in the system, are those 1980s cars, and they themselves are reaching the end of their useful life. They're 40 years old. They are breaking down now something like every 40,000 miles. Still a lot better than the bad old days, but trended very much in the wrong direction. And that's just the nature of aging infrastructure. So we're proposing in this plan to make a really comprehensive order to start replacing all of that 1980s era fleet, serving you see it here, the 136 on the A division, and then the BD, NQW, and S trains. So a pretty massive swath of the system. It's about a quarter of the subway fleet that is coming due over this next 5-year period. And so we're making a proposal to, even if the orders will be delivered, there's also, this is a key challenge we face and that the country faces. There are only a couple of manufacturers in the United States left of rail cars. They are oversubscribed. It's really important that we are able to provide them, as by far the largest purchaser in the country, with a steady, dependable plan for how much we're going to need over what time period. So this is in some ways a 10-year plan for replacing those cars, but we want to get it started now and do it in a predictable way so that we can encourage some of them to locate facilities in New York as has been the case in the past. New York was the sort of rail manufacturing center of the world at one time. And just in general, that they're able to plan ahead and make the capital investments to meet what is a really substantial thing. There's a similar story for Metro North and Long Island Railroad, also have a number of, a remaining number of these M3s, they're called, 1980s era cars, break down dramatically more frequently, are not actually ADA accessible because they predate the ADA having been passed. And so, a lot of investment needed in order to do the same thing for our railroads. Signal modernization is another key centerpiece of the plan. We're going to continue upgrading our sort of trains to what's called communications-based train control, sort of computerized signal system. It allows trains to run more frequently, closer together, more quickly, while maintaining safety. And this is the single biggest investment we can make to improve the reliability of our lines. I mentioned earlier sort of the tail end of the 25 to 29, or of our current capital plan will include the 6th Avenue line in Manhattan, which will mean that the B, D, F, and M trains get upgraded. In this plan, we'll also be proposing to do the Broadway line, the NQ, R, and W trains in Manhattan and potentially into Queens as well as the J and the Z trains in Manhattan from Broad Street up to Nassau. We'll also do work in Eastern Queens. These are really focused at some of the oldest lines in the system, or some of the oldest signal equipment. In this plan, we'll have addressed nearly all of the Franklin Roosevelt administration era equipment, but there's a lot of Eisenhower, right? So there's a lot of work to do. Both in terms of we actually think you'll actually get better service on the other end of this, but we're also avoiding what could be a sort of collapse of the older equipment that is just, again, reaching the end of its useful life. I'd also note one feature of the Broadway line is for folks who go into Brooklyn. It's a Manhattan audience. But if you go over the Manhattan Bridge, you'll know the experience of waiting on the Manhattan Bridge for a train to cross in front of you. And that's a result to a large extent of the signal system that just has to have a certain distance between trains in order to maintain safety. The new computerized system will be able to much more intelligently help trains cross in front of each other without leading to those sorts of delays. It'll address that bottleneck. So we're very excited to make that investment. Maintenance facilities is an example of something that customers don't see, but has a really substantial impact on their commute on a day-to-day basis, and really directly actually for pictured here is the Livonia shop in Brooklyn. It services the number 3 train. It had celebrated its 100th anniversary this year, 100th birthday. And it looks every bit its age. It's a trolley line, it was designed to service trolley cars in the 1920s. And in addition to being a sort of cramped, dingy, uncomfortable place for our workers to work, it's actually physically not configured for the new train cars we want to buy. One of the great features of the new train cars is that they have modern air conditioning units that load from the top. It means that if there is an air conditioning problem in the summer, we're able to quickly go in, remove the affected unit, swap in a spare, and do the repairs without that train being out of service. The ceiling height here is not sufficient to actually do that work. And so in order to upgrade the 3 train and be able to maintain it properly, we need to upgrade this facility. And so that's, this is the sort of thing that typically is the first thing to get cut when our capital plans get squeezed. It has been the story of the last 40 years because, something that there's not going to be a fancy ribbon cutting at the end of this project, although we probably will hold one of those. But it's to recognize that there is a very important impact to the service of our system. We want to do something similar for the 240th Street shop in the Bronx that services the 1 train. Things aren't quite as dire there, but the conditions aren't that dissimilar. And we need to make investments to components around the rest of the system as well. Another key example, and this is sort of my stand-in for the structural work we need to do, is the Grand Central Artery. That's our name for Metro North service from Grand Central Terminal at the south up through the Grand Central train shed, this sort of incredible network of 40 tracks sort of under Midtown, the Park Avenue Tunnel up to 97th Street, and then the Park Avenue Viaduct, which we're currently doing work on up in Harlem. The train shed in particular was built in 1910, has some of the most iconic and valuable real estate in the world, towering over it and built through it. And as well as Park Avenue and the sort of other streets in East Midtown. This diagram, which is a little small, but you sort of don't need to the main thing you're looking for is the presence of red. So this is a map showing in 1984, when we did inspections of the train shed, we found a few defects and we were able to repair them, sort of reasonably efficiently. 20 years later, that had started to change and the pace of decay had started to accelerate, and that has continued over the last 20 years. And so we've reached a point where it's just not possible for us to we still address sort of priority spot repairs, but we're clearly not going to get ahead of the problem, trying to address, one sort of hole at a time. And so we've started actually in our current plan in partnership with JP Chase as they've been reconstructing their headquarters. They agreed that they didn't like the idea of the street being ripped up right after their new building was in. So we've started in this plan partnering with them to reconstruct the train shed. In this next plan, we're going to accelerate that significantly. Previous plans and sort of the old way the MTA approached things like this, we thought it would be literally a 30-year project to do this work. We think we can get it done in 15 years, doing much more efficiently, bundling the work together and addressing it comprehensively, so that we have a new train shed. That means that our infrastructure is safe, that Park Avenue is sort of secure, and in fact that we're able to reconstruct it in partnership with the city, with the new malls and the sort of additional pedestrian amenities that folks have in mind. And so we're very excited to make this investment. Again, at the end of it, we'll have the same service we have today, but if we don't make this investment, there's a risk of sort of structural failures that would really imperil Metro North service.
What's contributing to the increase of the rate of deficiency?
It's a good question. It's fundamentally, there is, with steel and concrete, there is a turning point with water infiltration. Is fundamentally what it comes down to. Water, salt, chemicals, all of the things that get used at street level and that make their way through the system. And at first, the cracks are very small, but water gets in there and has a sort of cascading process. So this is our engineers go down here and they look. This is an incredibly well-built system. It's just time to rebuild it. We'll also do work in the Park Avenue tunnel where the structural issues are not as profound there, but there actually are some code and fire safety issues that we really would like to address going forward to sort of improve safety for Metro North service. So there's a lot more of that back of house stuff. Substations. We're proposing to address 65 plus substations, either comprehensively rebuilding them or replacing components. But I'll move on in the interest of time and happy to get into more questions. So on the customer experience, what we're making the investments in our stations, this involves, our most prominently, our investment in accessibility. I'll talk about it in a moment, but it also means, and pairing that work together with investments in the columns, stairs, physical assets of the stations themselves. It's a very similar story. A lot of our assets are at that 100-year point, and there's a very similar sort of decay of the physical steel and concrete infrastructure throughout the system. And then we'll also be continuing to upgrade our public address systems. Sort of moving into the 21st century, or at least the late 20th century, with our ability to communicate to customers. So accessibility, this is just a key example of where the MTA is a very different organization from what it was several years ago. We reached a settlement agreement with disability advocates a couple of years ago that put us on a commitment to make the system 95% plus accessible over the course of the next generation. What we're proposing here is actually a little bit ahead of the pace that was committed to in that plan, or in that settlement agreement, which is very exciting. We'll do at least 60 more subway stations. We say at least 60. We've named 30 of them at the outset of the plan. We're going to do a public engagement process, really kicking off in earnest. And we've been doing town halls and things like that, but we'll do a more dedicated process in the first sort of quarter of next year. to help us determine the next 30 plus, depending on cost estimates, things like that. We anticipate being able to do more than 60 overall. At the end of this plan, more than 50% of the subway system will be accessible. And no station will be more than one station away, sort of in one direction or the other from an accessible station. So that's, things that I think even 10 years ago, it was hard to imagine the MTA would have been able to get to. We have been able to really scale up our investment here and started to, make substantial improvements. This also is important to note, this builds on the 23 stations that congestion pricing will pay for, and that will move us further towards that goal. We'll also continue to make investments on the railroads, which are a little bit ahead of schedule or ahead of the pace in terms of their accessibility. And then fare gates are another key investment. I mean, folks see it in the system. The level of fare evasion costs us something like $300 million in the subways on an annual basis. Our proposal, there's a lot of other sort of, behavioral, interventions that are sort of planned on the capital side. What we're proposing is to simply replace the physical infrastructure of the turnstiles themselves. We think in this next plan, and this is a conceptual rendering, it'll look something like this, not exactly like this. But the idea is that we will have sort of modern fare gates that are a lot easier to use if you're coming in with luggage, with a stroller, with in a wheelchair, but a lot harder to get past. And the main thing or one of the key features that this allows is that these will allow us by code to eliminate the emergency exit gate. That is a majority of fare evasion in our system happens not with somebody jumping the turnstile, but with somebody sneaking in as someone else is exiting through that emergency gate. So these will close automatically but be able to fail open in the event of an emergency. So we're able to remove those emergency gates, but again, actually improve the accessibility and actually safety of the system while we do so. Our plan in this our proposal in this next plan is to install these at 150 stations at least. That'll be able to cover 75% of riders. And again, the real focus will be eliminating those emergency gates that are the main, both sort of not an ideal solution from an accessibility perspective and, a real contributor to fare evasion. And, finally, climate change, like I said, this is a key investment, both in terms of protecting our system as well as continuing to contribute to keeping carbon out of the air and preventing climate change or reducing its impact. One of the, I'll talk about some of the New York City specific things. I will note that the Hudson line on Metro North is a particularly vulnerable asset we have. If you've taken the Hudson line, it's not that hard to figure out. It's, it's right next to the river. It's very beautiful, but boy, it's right next to the river. And on the other side, so it's vulnerable to sea level rise on the one side. On the other side, there's very steep slopes. And in a sort of climate that has these frequent flash flooding events, that means that there are more frequent mudslides, sort of water inundation washouts of our infrastructure. So we're planning to comprehensively, and this will be a generational project, but comprehensively invest to make sure the Hudson line can continue to operate in the 21st century, starting from Spuyten Duyvil to Croton Harmon, the sort of most highest ridership and actually most vulnerable part in this plan, and continuing in the future. In the city, we've done an incredible amount of work since Superstorm Sandy to protect our system from coastal flooding and from a sort of hurricane event. But what we've seen over the last several years is that increased frequency and intensity of flash flooding events mean that there's a lot more work to do in order to protect the rest of the system from those very unpredictable experiences of flash flooding. So there's a few things we'll do to that end. And this is one where actually there's an incredible need for collaboration with the city of New York. So one thing is we will upgrade our infrastructure. We're going to rehabilitate our pump rooms that actually move 10 million gallons of water out of the system on a dry day. And are frequently overrun in the event of a sort of heavy rainstorm event. We'll also continue to implement street level mitigations, things like covers for our events. Manhattan's actually a key example where there's a lot of challenges. It's not easy to, there's a lot of places where the pedestrian activity means you can't raise those vents. We have in some places, but there's a lot of places where it's just not possible. But we need to, intervene in this on the street level itself to keep water from overrunning our system. A couple examples, we've worked really closely with the Department of Transportation and Environmental Protection in order to, strategize and coordinate. One of the key things that I like to put in people's heads is we really need, and I think DOT is sort of focusing on this now, but we really do need partnership with them when they're repaving the streets in order to increase what's called the curb reveal. So you can see in this photo that the depth of the street compared to the sidewalk is almost non-existent. And that's a result of over time, as they've milled the street, contractors have skimped a little bit. And over the course of decades, that has added up to what should be ideally a 6-inch curb, pretty much going away in some cases. And that means that when there's one of these heavy rainstorm events that the sewer system simply isn't able to cope with, there's no reservoir on the street for that water to stay. And that means that it ends up topping over into our ventilation system and into our, sort of stations in some cases, and into sort of businesses and residences, basements. So we've been working with DOT, actually, as they've been milling 7th Avenue. They've made a commitment that they're going to make sure that they're sort of ensuring that things get milled down properly. But it's something that, I would encourage folks to be eyes on. Once you start noticing curb reveal, you'll see it as a challenge throughout the city. And finally, we're on the sustainability side of the climate change picture. We're going to continue to implement our zero emission bus program. This involves both purchasing the new electric buses as well as upgrading our depots to have charging infrastructure that can actually deal with the electrical loads needed, and to deal with some of the state of good repair backlogs in our bus depots, which are similarly of quite old vintages a lot of the time and have significant needs just to be able to physically handle the upgrades. This is another piece where congestion pricing is going to contribute directly to this program being sort of there were another 250 buses that were sort of waiting for that funding to be in place. So the investment is going to be pretty substantial in the next few years. So this is a map, and this will be hard to see, but when you send it around, you can zoom in to your heart's content, showing not a comprehensive view, but a pretty good view of all the investments throughout the entire system that we intend to make. I didn't mention because it's not one of the boroughs implicated, but the Interborough Express is the sort of primary expansion project that we're looking to advance in this program, running from Bay Ridge, Brooklyn up to Jackson Heights, Queens, connecting with 17 subway lines. We think that'll be something that makes it a lot easier for the 1 million people who live in that corridor to get around, and ultimately to connect to Manhattan more efficiently where they need to. And there's a similar story to show on the railroad territory throughout the islands. I'll run through just real quick, some of the other ways that we think about this plan. It is an economic engine, not just for New York City, but for the state. These are numbers related to our last plan. We're in the process of updating them. They'll be slightly larger in the context of our current plan. Tens of thousands of jobs, tens of billions of dollars in GDP, sort of exceeding the investment itself. With investment, not just in the city, but actually in every sort of corner of New York State, we have suppliers, manufacturers, design firms that contribute to the program. That's true, especially for minority and women-owned businesses and small businesses. We are by far New York State's highest performing agency in terms of actually getting money into the pockets of minority and women-owned businesses, more than $1 billion paid out last year. We also have what I think I remember when I worked for the city, sort of being envious of the small business mentoring program that we have and sort of by state law are allowed to have, that helps us work directly with small businesses, especially MWBs, to help them learn how to do business with the city, get again money in their pockets, but also expanding our core of contractors. That's been a really successful program, and we're very excited to keep it up. We're also getting this work done more efficiently. The agency I work for was created within MTA Construction and Development, to consolidate all of our capital work in one place and get it done better, faster, and cheaper. And over the course of the last 5 years, we've made a lot of progress. There's more to do, but we're starting to see examples across the system. The Park Avenue Viaduct project is a great example that is sort of underway in East Harlem now. It's a 130-year-old structure. We are rebuilding it using these giant sort of gantry cranes to, over the course of a weekend, shut down 2 tracks, maintaining service, actually not canceling a single Metro North train. And we've replaced over the course of this summer and fall 8 blocks of this structure, again, without impacting service, and while saving something like 2 years off of the project schedule versus our traditional sort of methods. It's the sort of thing that, we've had smart engineers at the MTA for a long time. We didn't give them the tools to actually come up with things like that and implement it. And so we're very excited by the potential to continue to drive costs down, get ahead of schedule, and deliver all this work. Over the course of the last several years, that has added up to almost $1 billion in savings on our contracts versus our engineer estimates, which we're going to continue to push to drive up. And finally, I want to end just on the note that we know this is an ambitious plan, but it's something we know we can get done. The case study for this is the ADA station work. It used to be that when the MTA went to do an accessibility improvement, one station meant one contract. And that meant that you had a full procurement for each station, negotiation with the contractor. They had to mobilize, set up a field office. All of these sort of expenses were sort of concentrated and multiplied every time. What we've started to do in this plan, and what we're going to continue to do in more areas of our work, is to bundle that work together. So, have one contract address, in actually the largest case, 13 stations at once. And that makes it easier for us to manage the construction work. It makes it easier for the contractor to get economies of scale in ordering materials and equipment. And it just means fundamentally that it's transformed our ability to get work done. The MTA of 10 years ago wouldn't have been capable of complying with this settlement agreement we reached on ADA. It's only because we have these tools in place that we've been able to increase the pace, and that's been reflected in our ability to get work done across the system. So that's my presentation. I know believe it or not, this is the short version. I appreciate your attention and encourage you to check out. If you go to mta.info/capital plan, and we'll send it around. You can review it in all its even more gory detail. So thank you.
Thank you, Sean, so much. I'm sure we're going to have questions. I just wanted to flag a couple of things. I know you mentioned, with everyone's top of mind thing right now is congestion pricing coming back. You're here to discuss capital. We are still talking to MTA. Thank you, Alberto, about some different resources and hopefully other briefings and presentations that we'll be able to do before the implementation of congestion pricing, to speak specifically on that. But I know we're not talking about that today, so I just wanted to make a note of that in case anybody had any questions. Also would love, in the interest of time and respect for other people's time too, if it's about an item that's been covered or something close, that'd be great. But if you have like a hyper local or specific question, just for the other board chairs, and I know folks have to go, just being mindful of those questions. And maybe if you want to connect offline, or you have, if you want to connect with Alberto, maybe, that would probably be the best way to ensure we get out of here before 4 o'clock. So I think with that, if anybody has a question.
Can you tell us how to connect online?
Yeah, do you mind, is there a best way to share your contact, or?
Yeah, you can share with the board, it's fine.
Okay, so I'll share contact with, yeah. Becca.
The thing that I think most of our public really experiences as a problem is crime and sort of the random crime in particular. That's not largely a capital issue, it's largely an operating budget issue. But I would think that the gates and the cameras that are included in this plan are in part addressing that. Are there other items in the plan that have essentially a safety public safety kind of component at the same time.
Yeah, I do think that the gates are, probably the centerpiece of that strategy. We see time and time again when there are incidents in the system, it's often someone who didn't pay the fare on the way in. And so making the system more secure in that sense, I think will have benefits. The new subway cars that are included will have, our subways team has done a great job of installing cameras in, actually we're at 95%, right, that's right, Alberto, of cars. But they're sort of, they're not integrated into the system, and the accessing the footage is something that's more of a retrospective thing rather than something that can be done in real time. The new cars that we buy have monitorable cameras built right into them for monitoring incidents on trains. I think the other thing that I'd note is that a lot of the stats on crime in the subway system are actually have improved pretty dramatically over the last couple of years. We're at a place where the system is safer now than it was before the pandemic, which I don't. The perception issue, we certainly have not caught up there. One of the things that I think will help catch up there is just the increasing reliability of the system itself. Folks if your train comes when it's supposed to come, and it's a bright, well-lit train that arrives into the system, into a clean, safe feeling station, that helps us with the perception, even if it's not something that is directly has a, public safety sort of implement. But no, it is an important thing that we need to continue to work on.
Yeah.
Try to go through these as quickly as possible with the cost benefit analysis that JPMC did. Did they break down with the capital expense with the industrial sectors and also give a comparative analysis of labor included in that, or was that exclusively just capital improvements? Because that would be something that we dealt with at CB11 with overall budget expense.
Yeah, the analysis they did was based on level of investment. They didn't get into a breakdown on that. We have done an analysis in the past. There was a presentation we did to our board recently, a couple of years ago now, but where we did have McKinsey come in, do an analysis like the one you're describing in terms of looking at our sort of inputs to our cost structure versus other transit properties, that I'd be happy to sort of send information.
Yeah, that would be very helpful, because I think within those different industries that you cited up there, they have varying labor costs.
Yeah.
So their total budget versus we have both very labor and high capital expense, and how that's divvied up is important in giving a comparative analysis, especially with those sectors that you presented in the crowd.
That's
I think
a fair point.
we'll, and thank you for being here, but it gives a very skewed perspective, because I can just tell you, knowing people in those sectors, that they're going to be varied with their total budgets. So, which is my next question is, with the 30% increase, have you created any Delta construction budgets for Second Avenue subway?
So we have, over the course of the last several years, worked very hard on cost containment for Second Avenue subway, and that has allowed us to remain confident in the just a hair under $7 billion cost estimate for phase 2. Some of the the proof will be in the pudding as we put these next contracts out. But we have shaved from our estimates more than $1 billion off of the project cost through things like reusing the existing tunnel. Previous plans had us demolishing it and starting from scratch. We figured out a way to adapt it. A lot of other smaller tactical things that we've come up with that make us confident. We will be putting out the tunnel boring machine contract. We sort of are restarting the procurement on that now that funding's in place, and we're confident, but we'll see.
Yes, Joe O'Donnell's been keeping us in the loop. We're due to take a tour of those tunnels, which is, thank you everyone, my colleagues, for your patience, but it's important because there's some of these questions that weren't answered. And again, historically, my grandmother remembers when they took down the last segments of Third Avenue Valley.
Yeah.
So it's a long time coming. She's 99. When it was presented initially, and I was there for the announcement of Pete Buttigieg and SPI and Schumer earlier this year, it was always supposed to be a standalone project, not influenced or paid for through congestion pricing. And since that time, that has pivoted and without explanation. So I think there's a lot of concern within CB11 that now there's this tethering, or that it's now being financed through congestion pricing, when it was always pitched and presented prior to that it was not tethered. So we've not been, and I've spoken and asked the question directly to Jenna, there's been no explanation. And so we've been left, because we have in our community versus the others, we have a lot of people who drive a lot of reverse commuters, a lot of those that are homebound that need. And coming into the zone, they can't navigate all of the necessary hurdles. So I think there's a lot of questions. Of course, we're front facing, all of us are. So we hear the ire front and center. So again, relaying that, so you can run that up the flagpole will be helpful, but I'd like to know if you have any.
Yeah, I think I understand the sort of point and concern. The fundamentally, and sort of which color of money ends up paying for it is something that'll still be determined. But fundamentally, as we looked at our capital plan, we didn't see a way without full funding for the plan in place to, embark on a $7 billion expansion project while basic state of good repair needs were, at jeopardy. And so that's sort of the connection that sort of was in some ways forced upon us as we tried to think through how to navigate a $15 billion hole in our ability to, do some of the basic state of good repair work. So that's in an ideal world, the circumstance never would have come up. The fact that it did force some difficult decisions. What we're thrilled about now, and again, I understand the sort of concerns on the program as a whole, but what we're thrilled about now is we have this certainty in place, and we have a strong sense that the 25 to 29 plan is moving towards adoption. We're going to be able to move quickly and make up for some lost time, hopefully, on Second Avenue in particular, and also continue to manage the plan more broadly.
Right, and I appreciate that. And I think we shore up the 300 million per annum loss of bear evasion. I think you can just do the calculations quickly. That's a huge hole. But anyway, that being said, having lived in Japan and England, we were overdue some major improvements because Chikapitsu is probably one of the most efficient down to the second. So we look forward to partnering. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about sort of you put forward a lot of great improvements to the station, but can you talk a little bit more about sort of the prioritization or the phasing of these things? Because it's hard to understand what's happening when and what's the balance of, customer facing station upgrades versus back of house versus expansions, and sort of raising the elephant in the room of the congestion pricing of it all, of how those things might be affected by the ultimate sort of where we land on congestion pricing.
Yeah, so it's a great question. A lot of it comes down to, let me take stations as a good example. One of the things we're looking to do in this plan and going forward is to have a much more rational, predictable sequence to our station investments. So our plan, it sort of mentioned, I didn't mention it, but it was briefly spotlighted on one of the slides. Our plan is to get to a third of subway stations in this plan addressing components. So whether that's column stairs, things like back of house equipment, things like that. The idea is that on a 15-year cycle, then we would get to every station in the system. And that would be a great benefit to us because it would allow us to have that predictability, ensure that stations don't, as planning priorities shift, as new people are in charge, get left in the cold for a generation. So that's one example of a more structured, systematic approach. The other key piece that is going to be a living process over the course of this plan is figuring out how to make the bundling as efficient as possible. So when we are doing an ADA project at Canal Street, for instance, that will require certain outages. That'll require certain weekends where there's no service at that station as work is done sort of too close to the right of way to safely do it while trains are running. What we want to do, and what we started to do in this plan, but we have plans to scale up dramatically, is making sure that when there's an outage, we are doing as much work as possible on that line at the same time. And then we're piggybacking, we call it, to have, if the R is running express, or if the Broadway line is running express and there's no service at the local track, well, okay, is there a substation that needs component repairs? Can we do that at the same time? So it's a complicated process. We've got a lot of smart people in it as we've scaled up our planning department and our project development department in order to try to make sure that we're sequencing everything as efficiently as possible. So the balance between sort of broader categories, the plan itself has sort of a narrative category by category of what we're seeking to achieve in each one. We're in the process of, it'll be out by the end of the year, a data visualization sort of web portal that'll allow you to see sort of the breakdowns of where dollars are dedicated between, you know, sort of asset class by asset class. That information is all in the book, but it'll be a little easier to sort of visualize then. So there's a lot of work going into it. You know, there's, you know, 6 million moving parts in the system. But, you know, I think we are starting to, in a much more systematic, planned way, make this 5-year plan a 5-year plan and have sort of all of the moving parts sequenced within it.
Tammy and then Jessica.
Just gonna go first, her hands up.
Oh, sure.
Did you touch on the track guards? You speak about that at all?
The track guard, meaning
Like they've installed on a few
Yes.
locations, and just, Xavier mentioning Japan, like they have really good track guards there, and I think these track guards, with no offense to all of the innovation you're describing,
Yeah.
seemed to not inspire a lot of confidence in what they were aiming to accomplish. Just where does that fit into things?
Yeah, so there is an intention to continue to scale up that program. The platform barriers is our sort of term of art for them, but the concept there is that they are a dramatically lower cost and much less sort of structurally intensive in terms of the actual weight of them, and than some of the more capitally intensive platform screen doors that you may have seen in other places. While providing a sort of a level of safety for folks who, you know, have a certain perception sort of a lack of safety. You know, they're able to stand, hold them. That we think, you know, we're doing surveying now to see whether that is proving to be worthwhile or not. You know, I think anecdotally we think there's a benefit to them, certainly in preventing some of the slips, trips, and falls that make up a majority of the involuntary cases of someone ending up on the tracks. You know, we were in the process of a procurement for a pilot for the more intensive platform screen doors. That was caught up in the congestion pricing funding challenge, so we're in the process of figuring out what restarting that will look like. But the intention is to continue to survey and get a sense of what, you know, if this feedback is helpful. You know,
Knowing that they could also help with involuntary falls, I think changes my perception of them. I know I'm one person in 8 million, but otherwise I think they're a little laughable from a perspective of if someone wants to push someone on the tracks, that small piece isn't gonna do that. But I like the idea for seniors. You talked about the aging plan earlier, the idea that seniors have something to hold on to in the subway. And I think that is a nice, that in that area, they would bring added value.
Yeah, we don't pretend that they're a panacea or a replacement for some of these other interventions, but we think they have some value, and we're gonna see if folks agree.
So I think that goes back to what I didn't get a clear understanding is technically what exactly is funded and what exactly isn't funded. And there was wide reports of derivation, as Xavier alerted to. And while the long-term plan with the gates and the security and things is a long-term infrastructure project, what is happening in the short term before those are implemented to cut down on fare evasion? Because numbers that I heard were like 400 million a year.
Yep.
When we're talking about the last 10 years, knowing that could have been 4 billion, and perhaps, you know, better management of that could have gotten us to a different place today. But since we can't look back, I want to know what you're doing now in today's dollars, so we're not having this conversation about congestion pricing and the need for more money because there's more fare evasion, because we didn't roll in your infrastructure project for 10, 15 years, and now we're 10 billion behind on the initial goals. Like it seems a little bit like a wheel. And I'm looking to understand where that stops.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very fair point and something that we think a lot about too. I do think that the physical interventions that this next plan, there will be a design process, there will be a procurement process, but the intention is to move much more quickly than 10 years. The idea is that this is something that in the next couple of years, you will see. We've already started some of the piloting. There've been some software challenges, things we're working through, but we're trying to move as quickly as we possibly can because there is a recognition that sort of every day counts. I think that's the sort of capital side and the physical infrastructure side. There's a lot of work that our folks at New York City Transit are doing on an everyday basis. You've seen the gate guards in the system, the sort of civilian hired staff who are standing, discouraging use of the exit gate. The numbers on that have actually shown that they do pay for themselves several times over.
Is that a long term, like, what is being done today?
Yeah.
Like, how long is that program going to be in place for? What are we looking at for the reduction?
Yeah.
Right, from 400 million, are we gonna get down to under 1 million? I mean, and where is that, but if you're spending 300 million to save 400 million, it's a question of public value of dollar. So that's kind of where I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Responsibility have.
Yeah, so the gate guards themselves are the sort of thing that we will, I think, find sort of have a positive return on investment for us until we are actually able to replace those exit gates. And that's something that we intend to move forward as quickly as we possibly can in this sort of next 5-year period. The investment that we'll make on those gates will be something that pays for itself pretty darn quickly. If we are, really able to substantially reduce the 50% plus of subway fare evasion that happens in the, through the exit gates. I'll note that on sort of further from the capital side, but just as important is fare evasion on the bus system, which is, has spiked even more dramatically since the pandemic. It's an even more challenging sort of prospect on a sort of operational level. The fact is that for a long time, it was essentially an honor system that New Yorkers held up their end of the bargain on. And with the sort of the change in behavior since the pandemic has meant that fare evasion on some routes is well over 50%. And so we've started to deploy they're called Eagle teams, but they're sort of civilian, but often aided by the police because there are altercations that ensue. Fare enforcement on buses. We're going to need to continue to scale that up. We've, for the first time since the pandemic, in the last quarter, actually reduced the incidence of we're not sort of declaring victory yet, but for the first time, we actually stopped the trend and headed in the right direction this last quarter on the buses. The other piece of it that's just as critical from our perspective is toll evasion on our bridges and tunnels. We've conducted since March, we've conducted 54 enforcement events against ghost plates, people covering their license plates. That's also hundreds of millions of dollars a year for us, as well as the Port Authority and anybody else who charges tolls in this region. Obviously, with congestion pricing, that's going to be even more important from our perspective. So it's all, the other thing we did, and this is still, I think, still very much in the early stages, but in the last legislative session, we were able to work with the governor and with the legislature to reform the penalty system for fare evasion. There is now the first offense is a warning and an education component. And then there's an increasing scale for fare and toll evasion. That means that, it isn't something that somebody can perceive as just the cost of, worth a try. And so
a presentation on the revenue streams, because there's a lot of discontent that relates back to congestion pricing that's feels like a failure of public dollars and public management of public dollars and lack of enforcement that got us here.
Yeah.
So the programs and the infrastructure changes are really exciting to see and hear. Not really clear from even the deep dive how soon these are coming in to understand. And I think part of that has to do with the connection back to the revenue, much like, if you've now broached everything into one bucket, whether it's congestion pricing or regular budget, then we need to understand where the revenue is to understand as well, if you're not going to get the revenue, or what's your anticipated increase from cutting down on fare evasion, where does that go for a whole revenue picture?
Yeah, and I'll say that in general, the there's a couple of really important points you're raising. One is to note that the congestion pricing funding is dedicated to our 2020 to 2024 capital plan. So it's to fund $15 billion worth of projects in that plan. It isn't something that is earmarked to future plans because of the way the bonding works of revenue streams. So that means that we are in a position where in this next legislative session, we will be going to, the governor's announced she'll include in her budget, but a plan to fund the projects that I talked about today that are that 25 to 29 plan. I think tackling fare evasion is absolutely going to be a part of the picture. It's something that is, this is getting into the weeds a little bit, but that will go directly to our operating budget as opposed to our capital budget. But the two are obviously interrelated in our ability to support debt service and support the capital work itself. So, but they're, all really important questions. It's something that, I think our chair, Jano Lieber, I sort of smiling to myself, thinking about how often we have meetings about what's the latest on fare evasion, what's the latest on fare evasion. It is a top priority for the agency. And I think, again, it's going to take a lot of different things, police and sort of non-police, but sort of uniformed intervention. It's going to take, a culture change in the city, which is a challenge, but it's also going to take this physical infrastructure, and we're moving as quickly as we can on that front.
Yeah, I would add on that we're working with HRA closely with affordability.
Yeah.
Our 15 customer service centers, they can sign up for fare fares at those locations. Chestnut Heights, for example, has office hours twice a week. So we're trying to expand that program to all of them.
Will there also be an adjustment on the threshold? Because one of the things that I read is that reasons people avoid, they really can't, it's a hardship. And yet the threshold seems very low.
Yeah, the city, yeah.
Yeah, they expanded it recently, city council.
I think it's
pretty generous.
It's about to go into effect. I think or either just did or is about to. There is a relatively modest, but a bump in the right direction. We're all for that. We think that makes perfect sense.
If no one else has questions, I have a couple of quick ones. I felt like I knew this before, but I didn't see any in terms of the elevator installations. I didn't see any along the East Side 6 line. Was 6456 train, is there a reason for that? There
are a couple that are in, I'll scroll back. 110th Street is one of the ones in our, so you don't see any in this, first to validate your eyes.
Okay, thank you.
You don't see any in the first 30 of the next 25 to 29 plan. However, and this one I really don't blame you for not having caught. As I go back to the list of projects that'll be paid for by congestion pricing, 110th Street on the 6th,
yes,
this labeled actually, but on the 6th, and the 59th Street on the 456 as well as the NER. Will be paid for as part of the congestion pricing process. And then further downtown, actually, Canal Street is already accessible on the 6th, but will be made, that whole complex will be made accessible, so you can transfer between the 6th and the JZ and the NQRW services there.
Awesome. Also, trying to be respectful of people's time, like on the faster, better, cheaper, the bundling of contracts that you're doing, are you doing that across different, because that was an example just for elevators, are you doing that across the system? And if so, how are you utilizing subcontracting in order to achieve your small business and MWBE goals? How's that happening?
Absolutely. So the bundling process, there's two different ways you can do it. You can do it by sort of discipline, like the elevator projects, or you can do it by geography. And our ambition in this plan is to do a lot more by geography. That will mean bringing on someone who is the prime contractor and is responsible for bringing in, and has both MWB goals. We also have a pilot local hiring program that we're very excited about. Hopefully will survive sort of change in federal administrations, but that we've made, several of these projects have 20% local hiring goals now. But all of those, the way our we do a lot of design build work. That's sort of our primary means of getting contracting done these days. That means we're putting the contractor, they're signing up for achieving all of their MWB goals. They're signing up for working with all the different subcontractors. And we hold them responsible for it and have a sort of system in place where they're penalized if they don't sort of meet the contract requirements.
Thanks. Finally, what some may think is an esoteric question. It's kind of piggybacking on some of what Jessica was talking about in terms of how we are keeping people safe. When I say it's esoteric, because I have been suffering on platforms, as many of us have, with, obviously we are in a different climate environment. Our system was built 100 years ago when the city wasn't nearly as hot. And so thinking about, when we think about actually having the entire station sealed off, there's a possibility, if the station is sealed off, to actually potentially cool our stations. And is there any, because I don't recall ever hearing anything about actually investing in cooling stations. Obviously, we would have to have the stations sealed off so you're not actually also cooling tunnels. But is there any talk about that any time in the future?
So there is. We put out a request for information last year for cooling sort of approaches.
Okay.
There are a couple of interesting things that have come out of that. We are looking to do, and I actually need to check to make sure this gets turned back on now that we have funding again. We're looking to do a pilot of geothermal cooling opportunities. We are underground. There are potentials both on an energy production level, but actually primarily on a temperature regulation level to have sort of cooling in place. Basic things like fans that sort of have never been prioritized and are sort of a maintenance challenge, but could make a difference in at least making sure it's not hotter underground than it is on the street in the summer. No, it's you all know this, New York City's climate in 2050 is predicted to look like Birmingham, Alabama's.
And
today.
They move about differently than we do.
Exactly.
In cars with air conditioning. Yeah.
So it's something that we know we need to adapt to. There's also, in addition to the customer comfort, a lot of our electronic equipment and some of the communications equipment is also vulnerable. We have these communications rooms that have computers running constantly, get to absurd temperatures in the summer these days. So it is something that we have a sort of, we have a climate adaptation team within construction development. Station cooling is on their list. Our intention is, we announced a goal of getting to the 20 hottest stations in this plan. Exactly what the interventions are going to change based on each location. But we think there are things we can do even before you get to a place where you have that are shy of fully air conditioning a sealed environment, but that could reduce the temperature significantly. And it definitely is on our list of sort of innovations we're going to try to figure out over the course of the next 5 years.
As a woman of a certain age, I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just can't. I think one of the reasons that we do have a higher rise in bus ridership in terms of variation and ridership versus subway is, I'm with her. If I can take the bus, I'll take a bus because it's just that much colder versus roasting down below.
Yeah. The other piece of it is that, running more frequent service on trains helps, less time on the platform, right? The cars themselves, I think that the subways team has done an incredible job.
Yeah.
Whenever AC goes out, that car is out of service and it gets replaced in this more efficient way. So, but yeah, I hear you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being here as well. I have notes on what to ask you for, what to send out. So
excellent.
We'll be touching base on that, but thanks so much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here.
Um,
You have the cards?
I don't know, but I'm happy to.
I'm gonna share.
You'll get all our contact information.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
Thank
Thank you all.
much.
All right, I am happy to move over now to chair reports. We're in November of the month, so Xavier, you get to kick us off.
Tasty cakes, okay. So I'm ready for Thanksgiving, what can I say? We had full board Tuesday, good time, yeah, had about all. We are talking about, I was really glad to hear that comment from MT on culture change. For those of us who were here at 9/11, my apartment when I came back to the city was on John and Gold. luckily it was not in the city at the time. After 9/11, when we had the blackout of 2003, many of you remember that we were all freaked out. We didn't know there was going to be another terrorist attack. We didn't know. I was stuck in an elevator, got out one of those old Otis elevators. And when I got out, it was probably the most civilized time I'd ever seen in my life. Restaurants were trying to save money. Everything was lost. You know, they were like cooking food in red cups galore. It was like being in college again. You feel me? We've had a shift in culture. And I think that the pandemic really took, and we've talked about this at both executive and at full board, it really took the Band-Aid off, it ripped it off, and people have been very raw since that. In addition, coupling that with a lot of legislation that went through and expedited to the natural conclusion of our species condition. Right? So I think like in our district, we've been talking about Second Avenue subway a lot. We have a task force that deals with it when they can't meet, which is basically most of the chairs of our board. We tackle it at executive, and we've seen transition in the funding revenue streams and how they've shifted the narrative. And it's very much, we find it a little disingenuous of kind of having your cake and eating it too. I was there for the ribbon cutting, and Secretary Pete Buttigieg was there, and all the electeds, except for like maybe two. And this was earmarked at 3 point, I think it's like 2 or 4 billion, earmarked, not touched.
Right.
And now they started touching again. And I think that's, you know, again, a holdover, as we explained to a lot of our public and the board members, it's a holdover from the design of Robert Moses and what he allowed a lot of agencies to have that autonomous independence, if you will. So that was something that we're still tackling. It is an issue. We want the equity. Glad to hear about the 110th Street station to have an elevator access. We do have a lot of those mobility issues. We constantly hear about it, but we do want the work to begin. To that end, kind of give you an update from what has been discussed is they have started the mechanical movement on Second Avenue 106. So they've been tearing up everything by Franklin Plaza. I invite you to come over there at any time. Great food along that corridor, but it's very difficult for a lot of our seniors crossing over there. And that's something we're constantly dealing with on a day-to-day basis. It's tough. We know it's necessary, but it's more the subcontractors that are hired not paying attention, putting up roadblocks, putting vehicles in front of the crosswalks on 107th Street. So this is something that we're constantly dealing with there. Otherwise, full board was fairly straightforward, except we had our Public Safety and Transportation Committee had passed a resolution from a presentation from District Attorney Alvin Bragg's office asking for minor amendments to discovery reform. Those covered issues such as making only what is necessary items for prosecuting a case to be handed over. So for example, one of the anecdotal examples was we had a domestic violence case on 102nd and 3rd Avenue, right on Washington Houses, where missing cab receipt had the case summarily dismissed, even though they had video evidence of him going into the building, physical evidence, DNA evidence of battering the partner. But because of that missing cab receipt, it was summarily dismissed. And there were numerous occasions like that have happened in our neighborhood and others that make it very difficult, which is why they have a precipitous drop in prosecution, because they just can't get all the paperwork. Now, they did get funding from the state to allow for technology for sharing of information with NYPD and so on. It's really not fulfilling the needs because you have two antiquated systems. And I think they're even in different programming languages, going back to my days as a programmer. It's not functioning very well. And that's one threshold. The other issue is that some of the defense attorneys have been very strategic in running out the clock, was filing a motion to say, hey, you didn't give everything over. All of this was discussed in April. Full board was in managing it, I kept reminding everyone to be collegial on your points of view, because we do have one member who was formerly incarcerated. We have another person who works for legal aid. And they said that no one reached out to legal aid to hear the other perspective, which is false, because legal aid, as much as we are big fans of them, they are very selective in when they prioritize engagement. Case in point, we have a lot of housing issues, such as with 1199, and they refuse to engage. But this suddenly they find out last minute they want to engage. And so this is something that we want people, and it doesn't have to be them. So we're going to invite them back public safety and transportation, hopefully to have the district attorney in New York to both be present. To actually distill any issues, make sure they clarify facts so the board can navigate this issue. Compassionately, but also fairly and with facts. That's the thing. And I do applaud my board for being very civil. Because when I got on the board 15 years ago, you have people yelling, standing on chairs. Our former parliamentarian Francis Pedrotta would literally get on another chair to call for points of order. We have changed culturally. Now, again, and I want to be fair so that everyone understands, because I do wish you all to have a presentation from DA Bragg's office, who's a noted progressive liberal firebrand. And DA, not ADA, Andy Wershow, is the head of prosecution, and rightfully so, it was unfairly balanced that the moment you gavel in, here's your defense. That's all your evidence. Good luck. Carry on. That was imbalanced. And with the way they looked at it as someone who they were also advocates for the changes in Albany, is that it went from like this side to this side. And they just want to bring it to balance so that they can actually prosecute, because they had dropped in half the amount. They just can't meet the timeline of 15 days. And again, we don't want people on Rikers either. So it's one of those challenging things. And I had to remind people to stop, to refrain, not stop, but refrain from emotional, and I'm sure you've dealt with this on all your boards, is that, people get quote unquote triggered and emotional, and they use emotional language to kind of devalue the argument. And I said, listen, facts matter, data matters. It's how you say it. If you are triggered, someone else's trigger is not your responsibility. I tell my own kids, if you're triggered by something, you're bothered by something, you have to figure out why. If you didn't like the way someone said it, ask, would you mind rephrasing that? I'm not understanding it. And I had to be as pedantic to say, who's seen the 40-year-old virgin, right? Kevin Hart. And he says, if I'm not understanding the words coming out of your mouth, I'm going to take him as offense. That got a laugh, but let me take that, but it got through. It's about messaging, right? And I think that's something we're dealing with. And I think with the trainings, it's, as I've said here at this body and the others, and when I've spoken at TA meetings, I said, listen, the written and spoken word is the most inexhaustible resource on the face of the planet, yet we err. And we got to stop shaming and canceling each other, because that anyone who wants to shame and cancel, you shut down conversation. And I appreciate this because I think it's important in light of the morose experience of this month. I talked to a lot of people down at Somos, and Andre, you were there, right? At Somos, yeah. Marquise was there at Somos. Out of all of the electeds, all of the people there, without the CD hat on, I was the only one who went to Southern Ohio independently. They hadn't had anyone there. And I did 2 diner meetings and had anyone there over a decade. And I listened and I took the heat. We talked about our commonality. People, these are farmers, truckers. This is what we have to look at. And it starts with us here, in this body, is that we have to start talking with one another. And that's what I've been expressing. So a lot of what we walked away from full board is talk with one another. Don't talk at. That's not going to accomplish anything. And it is okay to disagree. That importance is how we bridge gaps, and you don't have to agree on 100%. That is also okay. And I said, treat it, treat this like a duck. You weigh in, you leave whatever issues you have outside. You argue the ideas, not your feelings, argue ideas. Then when you're done, you weigh out and you can be friendly outside. That's how you do it. And, so we're tiptoeing our way slowly there, to get people to think differently. So that's kind of a cultural issue that we're facing. I'm sure as many of you are facing those issues. We seem to be slowly moving at a glacial pace. But with that, people are like, wow, and it was just past 9 when we finished. And they're like, this was a long meeting. And I'm like, I just said to them, I really have spoiled you guys with keeping this under 2 hours. So I think this is something we're working on, but we will be addressing that in December. We are having a substance abuse panel coming up in December that'll be dealing more with the.
Did you say under?
I have been keeping it under 2 pretty.
Wow.
General?
For full board, yeah. So I've spoiled them.
I'm lucky to get under 3.5. That's my goal is 3. My goal is 3 and.
It took a while to get there, to be candid, and again, I don't want
We just done 2 last month.
yeah, so.
Yeah, they can get from a lot.
I get the fact that he cuts me.
You know, I totally agree. That's not good. It's the cultural change. We try to say, just land the jet, right? What's your point? We, the niceties, we love you to death. It's bullet point, highlight reel.
Yeah.
Have you read, like the committee reports? We say, hey, top two, your action item. You're allowed more time if you have action items. The longest one we, you know, and again, with this one with discovery reform. This is the other thing that I could use some assistance with from all of you is people reading the materials. We had a two-page cheat sheet from Danny. We had, and it referenced a footnote. 4 people read the footnote to the Manhattan Institute report, and then no one read the footnotes from the report, which is, if anyone, back to college, you read the citations, you read the footnotes, and no one in that room except for myself had. And I think that's something that I said, you've got to go back and do your homework, especially with something as sensitive as this. So with that, we have, you know, like I said, we have a substance abuse panel happening in December. Glad to see that happening. It's not going to deal with the fair share component. We still stand strong on that. It's more like, what are the resources? How are we navigating this? Congressman Espiat has expressed that he's very frustrated with Oasis, for example. We have about 13 providers. Only 2 have given us data reports on what zip codes people live in who are using services in our community. And we do have an unfair saturation medical redlining there. The 2 providers that have shared, Mount Sinai and CCHP, are over 50% from the community. So that is a threshold we'd like to see, is that you're predominantly caring for the community.
You have cabs for the other 2?
We have, well, so we have cab with Mount Sinai, I believe. Metropolitan, we have a cab. Henry J. Carter, we have a cab, but these are dealing with opioid abuse and substance abuse. So the other vendors there have refused participation and withheld information. Case in point, On Point, the safe injection site, they have refused to give us the raw data that they promised to give us over 3 years ago. This is still problematic. They started Valerie Vasquez, who's first deputy commissioner of CAU. When they did give it, they said, oh, majority of people are from the community, and they weren't, because when we found out where they were domiciled, the majority were not. And our overdoses are higher now in 3 years than they were previously. This is a problem for us, and for those of us who are Generation X, myself and any other Gens? You're Gen X.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we remember the 70s,
Yes,
80s and early 90s and what that was like. So we're trying to get people back
No.
because we do want people to, so for example, Mount Sinai, Dr. Singh has gotten more people from heroin to methadone to buprenorphine to clean. He has a very healthy track record. And they're looking, we want to be accountable with our partners. And the first, it starts with data, and those that are unwilling to provide data. As I tell my kids, if you have a withhold, that is tantamount to lying. If you're withholding information, you're lying. So,
Xavier, I'm sorry.
Oh,
We're gonna have to pause.
yeah.
Can I do it?
Yes, please,
Can
go
I do
ahead.
it? Highlights, I need the highlight reel and
Done. Sorry.
She's waiting for it.
Done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I love it. So those are the highlights, what we're dealing with. We need
Thanks.
your help and assistance. I apologize.
Great.
I got your back.
You got me back.
Thank you.
I love it. So those are the things, would like to welcome you out and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Catherine was on virtually but had to jump, so I will pass it to Tammy.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Our company passed a resolution supporting the lead paint right to know. If anybody needs information, we're happy to send you. We have the map that was issued by the city for where lead pipes are around the city. We actually have a ton of them in Lower Manhattan due to the age of the buildings. And we had a mom and a child come and explain the effects of lead paint on children, the child who was affected. It was brutal, but I'm happy to share it. We'd love to get more support on that. The borough-based jail team, I'm delighted to say we finally have an independent monitor in place, just 2 months, 2.5 months before the final demo is all done. We are concerned because the RFP we hear has been issued and has been awarded, but the CAB that was supposed to be part of the RFP process hasn't actually met in, well, I think over a year, so we're looking to get more information, would love some updates. We have been raising concerns with 10 South Street, the Bowery Maritime Building. It has a fantastic private club there. It is a historic landmark. And we sent a letter to the head of EDC and all our electeds because they have a public access requirement and public reporting requirement back to the community, which we've been trying to work with them since 2022, but it's silent. You can't go and use the bathroom there. They're supposed to have a cafe that's open for public on, 108 days. There's a whole long list. And yet the operator, who's a very qualified operator who's running the establishment, keeps coming back and asking us for liquor license stuff and expansions and all this. I really just want them to uphold the reporting and then this. It shouldn't make a difference if the titled person that you had, whatever the coordinator's, title doesn't exist. There's a person who they reported to, they should be able to provide the information. So it's exceedingly frustrating, and I have been very clear with EDC. It demeans the public's faith in the process and the contracting and the caretaking of the historic assets of the city when EDC does not enforce compliance with rules. It's just the way that rolls. We had a presentation this month for Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency, a little frightening with the incoming administration on what's going to be funded and what's not funded and how we're protecting the buildings and the financial district and things like that. The only push and pull that we're in now with them is we all really want to support this and we really would like to get as much as we can in. There's a constant dialogue of difference of what is open space. And the question starts to become, do you consider sidewalks open space? We at Community Board 1 do not consider sidewalks and throughways as open space. We're looking for passive and active recreation as open space, which is a very different dialogue than, adding an extra walkway or bike lane. So we really want to support them and we want to give our support. We also know that if we don't, if we allow them to demolish a pier that has a large public space and then build another pier that has primarily economic use for tour boats, that we're actually in a net loss for active and passive space versus quote open space. You don't get to put a Band-Aid of grass and call it open space. And yet we don't get these decisions done now. There's no race for funding because of where we are. But once you hit 30% design, you cannot change anything once it goes out into the water. So it's a large topic of conversation that we were having. We also heard from Congressman Goldman about the Michelle Go Act, which we are supporting. And I'd be really delighted to share because we think that the issues are very complex for homelessness and mental health in the city and safety. And really it starts with access to services and coordination and how everything works. The Michelle Go Act expands access to psychiatric care by allowing federal Medicaid dollars to pay for psychiatric beds in some facilities. That will help increase the number of people, the number of beds and access. And it's super important. We're happy to share that around if you want to share it. Because it then comes back to the opening of shelters. And we are on the community level and our council person, we supported the opening of 105 Washington, which is now 100% full, which we're really excited about. It's a safe haven that opened this year. We were promised that it would be primarily for the homeless in Lower Manhattan, south of 14th Street, which encompasses the catchment zone, because it was really, we needed another one downtown. They reported last night that 50% of the people are not from the catchment zone, so we're very confused as to why not. And we understand that there are people everywhere who need services, but we were really hoping to focus on south of 14th, getting people off the streets.
They being brought in then?
Yeah. Potentially, yeah. And we had the documentation that DHS has brought to us were about how many homeless people we have on the streets in Lower Manhattan and capacity to build in Lower Manhattan to serve Lower Manhattan. And I'm not saying lower just CB1, it's south of 14th, which is a giant catchment zone. So it's a little confusing. There's another one opening up on East Broadway next month that we were told. Our objection to 320 Pearl is what we asked for was supportive beds, because there needs to be a second step once you get people more stabilized. But 320 Pearl is operated by Slate Properties, bought it. And we found out last night that it is far more profitable for them to do the safe haven model versus supportive housing, even though the building is attached to a pre-K to 8, pre-K to 5. And we had a conversation that we think the city as an overall needs to do two things based on our experience. One, when citing locations, there needs to be an environmental impact review. Not only about, because DHS admitted it is a real estate deal about the building that they're in. And how they take care of the constituency that they're supporting. But that doesn't actually work for the community. When you're opening up a drug rehabilitation place, that's a safe haven that has high need, high mental health facilities attached to a school where the front door is less than 20 feet apart where the pre-Kers line up. You need to look at that school. The school is underfunded. They don't have enough security guards. They don't have enough, there's no crossing guard. Like, you're just adding to the environment in a non-positive way for anybody. So I think that the city needs to do a better job of taking a look outside the four walls. It's not just a real estate deal. And with the people inside, people need to go someplace to smoke. Where are they gonna smoke? Underneath the school windows? Across the street in the school playground? It's just a very complicated situation that we would hope that there's a more robust, holistic look that the city can do on that. And then there's a new rule change that DHS has that's actually out that I'm not sure if any of the boards know. And it changes their rulemaking on how they engage with the community on citing new shelters and what they're required to do or not. And I think it's an important conversation to be having, because the rule change requires them to do public information sessions, which is good, better than a hearing, which is a one-way, but it only requires them to take in questions. It doesn't actually require them to dialogue. And I think with transparency being muddier than the top of the table here, it's not helping what we need to help. Nobody's denying that we have a homeless problem in Manhattan. But the siting attached to a school, that's not great siting. Other services, making it so that incentivizing developers to do safe havens versus supportive services and housing when it's next door to a school. Wouldn't you want to put something that's a little bit better for the environment? Like, just attached, literally attached. The windows look into the shelter looks into the school. You know, smoke, there's just so many barriers that didn't seem like it was a smart decision that we could have looked at and somebody could have had a better discussion. And it just feels like the city gets what the city gets, that the developers bring it and they say, great, we need more shelters, let's just do it. And nobody took a look at what was around. Nobody's looking at what services in the community are available for the people inside the shelter as well. Where would they go smoke? Where is there a park space that's not restricted because it's all school playgrounds?
Highlight reel.
So that's my highlight reel. Please support the Michelle Go Act. Please support the lead paint right to know, and please do public comment for the DHS. It closes December 2nd.
I was gonna mention the same thing. It's comments are due very soon, so get them through.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I was gonna pass it over to you, so
Oh.
you're welcome to.
I was actually, picking up on that idea of doing something fast versus getting the best result is something that, keeps popping up in with many different specific examples, but it keeps posing a problem. Sort of the number one thing that's happening in my district is what's now being called the Gansworth Square development. End of last month, the city announced that this 66,000 square feet of city-owned property, which is in the meatpacking district, is going to be developed. The last vestige of the active meat market is being moved out. And it will be developed in a combination of housing in up to supposedly 600 units of housing, 300 of which is supposed to be affordable, plus an expansion of the Whitney Museum, plus the creation of 11,000 square feet of open space, which is to be programmed by the Whitney. The unusual thing about this is that this is being spearheaded, the housing component, by EDC and not HPD. The supposed goal statement is that this is to move more quickly, you know, the question is on why, that keeps getting raised that I hear is, well, this is city-owned property, why isn't the first goal to get to have all affordable housing? Even if it takes a little longer and we have to look for subsidies, this is maybe the last piece of public space that we have to put in affordable housing in our district. That being said, always happy to hear that there is affordable housing on, you know, on the planning board. The EDC is telling us they want to put an RFP out January, when they have just announced this in November. So it's moving, it's very fast, and it's and that always concerns us. Another thing we had this month, District Attorney Bragg hosted a meeting on public safety in Washington Square Park. As I've talked about in the past, the park and environments have become sort of a gathering place for addicts, for dealers. We also have a homeless problem in the area. It is, unfortunately, these kinds of issues are categorized as quality of life. So they get lower treatment, but residents are feeling threatened. And we want to deal with this in an appropriate way. It is an intersection, not just law enforcement, but social services, outreach, in terms of getting people housing, getting people treatment. And we had also in attendance was the new public safety deputy mayor, Chauncey Parker. And they announced that we are going to have a new task force that is going to address these concerns on a granular level. Some other things, our traffic committee had a presentation on the state DOT's mobility and safety improvement study of Route 9A. It's very gratifying to hear this is moving forward. This is apparently the first one that has been done since the creation of Route 9A 30 years ago. We also had our Parks Department committee had a presentation on the Vital Parks for All. The new digital platform is a trove of information. People are responding to it very positively, and I know that the borough president and the Parks Commissioner are co-sponsoring a forum, which is great to hear. Open space, is just, can't have enough. I want to note that our outdoor dining, while we have only had, this month we had 2 sidewalk and 3 roadbed applications, and we have, I think, 10 for next month. We have been advised that we have over 500 applications in the pipeline. And so the issue becomes, how are we going to, review volume of that amount? Our working group is really committed to working with applicants and helping them through the process. The feedback I've gotten is that in our district, the applicants are very happy that we are even-handed in how we approach this. But with numbers like that, how do you, you end up having to pick and choose which applications you actually pay attention to. And lastly, I've talked up in the past the Fund for the City of New York, the Planning Fellow Program. I'm very happy to say that we have been assigned another fellow on a research subject dealing with land use and how it's changed in our district over the past 20 years, particularly in terms of residential, commercial, and mixed-use developments. These fellows are a great source of new information and doing research on your very specific district. So I always encourage people to put in ideas and hopefully you get some help. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you so much. I know you mentioned it, the email went out to all of our chairs as well as our Parks Committee chairs. But yes, we are having a town hall with Commissioner Donahue from Parks and with the Borough President. It's gonna be on Monday, I believe it's 5:30.
Monday.
Yeah, just 6:30, excuse me. Doors open at 6 at the Chelsea Recreation Center. So please, if you're able to, would love for anyone to be able to join us.
This Monday, right?
This is coming Monday.
We have our full board in front of us.
No worries. I think with that, I will pass it to Andrea.
Sure. So I'll keep it short. The next week is our full board meeting and we have elections. I'm running unopposed, so you'll all be seeing me again. I also, this year's elections posed some questions for us, just curiosity of how other boards manage their elections process. We have a nominating committee, we do it that way. We try to recruit candidates and that sort of stuff. So it was just something we were just curious about how other boards manage it, because we hadn't discussed it in a while. I also last month named an economic development committee subcommittee chairperson. And after it's been long dormant for like a year and a half. And we, with all the turnover, had to kind of reconfigure that committee a bit. So we glad to say that we've reconvened it. And we heard from Lower East Side Employment Network, from a variety of the bids, just to chat with them about how some of their general goals have been. And as you can imagine, with the bids, a lot of them had perennial concerns of the last 2 years with sanitation and public safety. Bye, Susan. We discovered some interesting bedeviling challenges that I'm sure many of you all also are facing, particularly in maybe some of the more downtown CBs, about containerization and composting. Some of the just infrastructure of very narrow streets, our most saturated business areas are also the most tenement type buildings. So it's really been a challenge to try and navigate that I hope to kind of work with them on kind of coming up with some sort of solutions. What else we had, similar to CB2, we're struggling with our SLA committee. We heard 40 applications this week. It was a long meeting. We had, about half of them were roadside and outdoor dining applications. So we're also trying to figure out how to manage that as well. So maybe that's another conversation for another time. We've had, we have 2 parallel land use sagas in our district between Essex Crossing and the formation of 2 community land trusts. So HPD came to talk to us about their RFP for one of the sites on 5th Street. So we had an informational presentation there that a lot of the CLT operators in our community hope to have the hope to bid on it. And if the council were to pass, oh my God, I'm blanking on this, the COPA legislation, that would be a lot easier. So hopefully that happens. But yeah, those are just the highlight reels. Yeah.
Very good. I do want to say thank you to Andrea for hosting us. We had our first in about a year, because I hosted the first one, and then chair luncheon at Contenta right near us. So thank you for.
You missed one. We had one.
Oh, yes, you did have one. You're right.
Yeah.
I did. So
You missed
the third. Thank you.
Nice. Great. I think Jessica had to jump for a minute, so I will pass it to her.
Okay. All right, so we had our full board last week. We are still struggling with attendance and quorum and sort of the limited members that we have on our board at the moment. We're starting to run up against sort of people coming because our term starts the appointments, so we're starting to get people starting to run afoul of our attendance policies now. So letters are starting to go out. So hopefully that solves our problem or sort of makes people aware of delinquency in that regard. But we're still struggling with sort of our dwindling membership. So we're hoping for help on that, as we discussed. For dining out, we actually passed a resolution at our last full board to sort of, we had previously had an open restaurants task force that created sort of a rubric for the analysis of these outdoor dining establishments. And essentially we have now deputized our committee to fill out that application on behalf using that rubric in order to provide comments sort of in the limited time period. So they're the ability to sort of say no comment if we have no issues, or to raise issues and sort of take them through the process of calling up those applications and sort of moving those along to deal with sort of the onslaught that we're all receiving and the sort of strange timeline that presents itself. We have also gotten FCNY fellows. We got 2, so we were very fortunate this time around. We have 1 doing a study of public bathrooms in our district, looking at sort of a number of from sort of standalone to within city properties and sort of how those all work. So I'm very excited to see that moving along. And then also a study of affordable housing, I believe mirroring the one that was done by CB4, if memory serves, to try and sort of replicate that within our own district. We had a presentation on the future of Fifth, the redevelopment of Fifth Avenue from Bryant Park to Central Park, for sort of the conversion of it primarily to a more pedestrian walkway. Very exciting. That'll be coming up formally before our community board, I think in December, maybe January. We got kind of a preview there. So that was interesting to see. And then coming up before us, also there was a presentation by City Planning on the Midtown South rezoning, which is coming for us very soon, as well as a little bit for CB4. And so any advice or sort of words of wisdom there, I'll take them. But otherwise, we're just sort of moving along that process. Yeah, I think those are my bullet points.
I'd say share whatever past history you have with everybody early to get people the most caught up on the history. So people walk into the room a little bit more knowledgeable and they can absorb the newest information instead of having to spend the time.
Thank you. One thing that I didn't get to note earlier, but for those of you who have worked with her before, since you mentioned the rezoning, and I want to make sure that you're connected with our land use team. Lizette Chaparro, who you've probably worked with a lot, is no longer with our office. Miss her, she's across the park now, working as, I believe, special advisor to Maria Torres Springer. So very happy for her. But she was a wealth of knowledge and really great to work with here. Her team is exceptional. So Madeline and Celeste were both here. They had to jump to another meeting, but I want to make sure you're connected with them. I know that they either attend the meetings or watch the recordings of any land use meetings that are happening. So just making sure that you're connected as well for any support that we can give you.
Yeah, if you could just recirculate their emails to me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Do that.
I can just chime in real quick. We received some text messages from folks that are watching online. If you could I just want to say for the record, it was Bradley from CB5 who was just speaking. So if you all can just say who you are, what board you're representing, so that people who are following online. As I've struggled with sometimes, because the view, you can't actually see who is speaking. That would be helpful for the people who are online.
Great, thanks. I'll pass it to Sandy with CB6.
Okay, Sandy McKee from CB6. I also ran uncontested, so I'll be here next year. And we do not have a nominations committee. It's a very open election. Couple of things. We actually got 3 fellows. One who's looking at the costs of keeping the FDR. One who's looking at loading zones and how they can be distributed throughout the district and what's the need for them. And one who's looking specifically at 3rd Avenue in our district. We've had a lot of concerns. We hired a planning consultant. We want to dive deeper into what can happen there. Another thing, as you know, Beth Israel is in our district, and we've been having discussions asking people to support. It's the LICH bill. which is the Community Healthcare Act. And it was passed by both houses in New York State, but it has not been signed by the governor. And apparently she must sign it by the end of December, or it'll have to go back through the approval process. So we're asking people to make note of this and ask her to please sign it into legislation. And it's about closing hospitals, having more community voice in how hospitals are closed. We also were alerted by our Federal Assembly member that the EDC is planning to rebuild the Skyport Marina and fix the garage. And this is something that the community has asked since, I think it's 2011, to have it be removed from the community. So please don't repair it. And it's actually it's a garage, garage that's built on a pier. So it's susceptible to flooding. The thing that was most annoying is that the EDC didn't actually tell us about this. We had to find out through our assembly member. So now they're coming to us in December. We're still following up on the ULURP actions. Spark, we got some interesting information that the EDC has put in a specific request that it be only lab use, and that there's a potential that it could be changed to housing in the future if lab use is not found to be viable. And we'd really like that to be included into the action. I think that's everything. Yes, happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, thank you.
I probably should have said we also got 2 urban planners, and I apologize for not mentioning that. One is studying the possibility and feasibility of governance for an East River Alliance that would get start at the Battery and go all the way up to 14, and looking at opportunities to transform the waterfront in terms of community engagement and governance and funding and things like that. The other one is looking at the possibility of green infrastructure and where it could be added in our district.
Great. Pass it over to Beverly.
Beverly Donahue, Community Board 7. A lot of forming and norming, and we're getting ready for the storming part, right? Roughly half of our committees have now got new co-chairs. And we're hoping that will revitalize some that had gotten a little bit set in their ways and make them able to take on new work. We got some bylaws changes through our steering committee this week, and we'll go to full board in December that will permit us to have public members for the first time and make a number of other corrections and changes to our bylaws. And we are launching an effort to have a survey of our board members. On the sort of substance side, we've gotten quite deeply involved in an initiative spearheaded by Councilmember Brewer to bring together multiple stakeholders around changes to the 71st Street and Broadway area, where 2 young students were shot not too long ago, but that's on top of many other sort of more infrastructure-based issues in that area. So we've got a number of city agencies attending the meetings to hopefully be able to have a more comprehensive approach to dealing with that. We've been supporting Senator Hoylman Siegel's effort around Amsterdam houses, where there's a very decrepit asphalt area that he's gotten state funding for to create a play area for a pre-K service that is in Amsterdam houses, and hopefully have that open to the community in the hours when the pre-K does not operate. Very concerned about and trying to track closely the work being done now at the council on City of Yes for housing opportunity. And we are beginning to absorb and hopefully focus a lot on the new Central Park loop proposal that has emerged from the Conservancy and DOT on how to make changes to the traffic arrangements and the physical infrastructure of the loop itself. We have a strong interest. I need to speak with Victor about in getting an update on the Morningside Heights urban renewal area. We understand there have been many changes since we last heard about it a couple of years ago. And there's strong interest in understanding what those changes mean for us, because part of that plan sort of segues into our northern area. So I'd love to arrange that with you. And I think those are the highlights. So happy Thanksgiving to all.
I will also add, since our office is a co-applicant on that, that we should also, if it's good to maybe have a conversation with your housing and land use folks and our land use team. I can also try to help arrange that.
I'd love to arrange for some kind of presentation at our housing and land use committee. If there are folks from your office, Eric, that would be willing to participate.
City council is taking the lead on.
I'm sorry, who?
City council has the lead on like the actual like planning of it, but we're part of the conversations with them and with DCP. So even if it's just making sure that they're connecting with city council land use team to give you a presentation, we can help with that.
Okay.
Great. CB8 is not with us here, so I'll pass it to Victor Edwards from CB9.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Victor Edwards, Chair of CB9. Since we had such a long discussion on elevators, I'm going to jump into that. We met last month with MTA and Columbia University regarding a elevator at the 125th Street station, which is probably one of the highest in the borough and maybe in the city. We've been working on this for quite some time, and it was pushed back this last meeting because of congestion pricing. Now that congestion price is moving forward, hopefully this project will move forward, because a lot of people use that particular subway stop and it's not accessible. Second item, I had the opportunity to meet with the new interim Columbia University president, Katrina Armstrong, late last month, and just to talk about community concerns and access to Columbia University itself for students in particular, and just the public. Right now, it's closed to access for the most part. So we're just trying to work our way through that. Also, for the last 5 years, I've monitored the community benefits agreement with Columbia and West Harlem community. So we spoke extensively about that and pushing forward to get more benefits, especially on the educational side and housing as well. So that was a robust conversation there as well. Also, I'm part of a meeting with State Senator Cordell Clare that meets with a group of people each month to talk about Columbia's expansion into the community and some of the benefits, some of the housing issues. We've been meeting, I think, about 6 months now. So that's always interesting. We're meeting today again. Trying to always give them our side because we're in the area itself. A lot of people that sit on that committee are not in Columbia's area, and their perspectives are quite different from ours. We are in Columbia space as far as meeting and office space as well. So we have to work kind of like both sides, but it's coming along. NYCHA's RAD PAC program in Hattonville Houses is going through that now. I'm a former NYCHA employee, so I know the budget constraints firsthand, having run the borough of the Bronx and Staten Island. And I just want to make sure people understand what this means going from Section 9 to Section 8 and how that changes things quite a bit. And particularly our seniors. A lot of the seniors there are confused and they feel if they don't sign, they'll be evicted. And I was just trying to bring up questions in the meeting that they might not think of so they can hear what's going on. The renovations are extensive, grounds, elevators, apartments themselves, facades of the building, which I've seen, firsthand. There is a group there, like other developments, that are pushing back against it. I'm just trying to hear their concerns, and there's always incorrect rumors going around. So I'm just trying to quell those and make sure people understand exactly what's happening. So that's moving along quite well. I had the opportunity to meet with our city council member, Yusef Salam. I've been trying to meet with him since he took office, but he's been on the road quite a bit with the Harris campaign. So I did have a chance to sit down with him and meet this week. And we had some great exchanges and ideas and things he hadn't thought of and things that I could use from him and vice versa. So I think that was a good dialogue to get started. So I'm looking forward to working with him quite a bit. And on this past Tuesday, we are part of the Harlem Holiday Lights Parade. 20 floats that go down 125th Street throughout Harlem. And it was a great time had by all, as they said. We had a great DJ. We had the State Senator Claire on there. We had Keith Wright with us, Jordan Wright with us, State Assembly member Al Taylor. We're all on our float. I think we had the best float.
Made the news, you guys were all over the news.
So it was good, and we had a lot of young people from the two NYCHA developments on the float as well, and they thoroughly enjoyed themselves. So, and we met with Mark earlier and Keisha, and then we had a little after gathering as well. So it was great. Just a good way to start the holidays. And lastly, brunch with my fellow chairs last week was fantastic on a different level, just relaxing. So thank you so much for hosting, and hopefully I'll host sometime in the near future up in Harlem, and be welcome.
Some good options there too. Some good
Yes.
options all over the borough. That's,
Oh, yeah.
that's part of it.
I think that's one of the nicest things about when we get together is going to other people's boroughs. Because everybody has a fun, cool place in their neighborhood.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
It doesn't break.
happy Thanksgiving to everybody in your families.
And we had a great time for holiday lights too. Our office hosted, as it does every year, as well as kind of like a public watch party viewing area with hot chocolate and desserts. So a lot of folks from the community were out there, and we were really happy to see that year after year. So
Thank you.
all right, I think finally I'll pass it over to Charles from CB10.
Wrap this up real quick. All right, good morning, everybody. Charles Johnson, currently second vice chair of Community Board 10, first vice chair elect. Marquise wants to apologize for not attending. I'm speaking on behalf of him. We actually had a District 5 priorities breakfast, so he needed to be in attendance of that. Just gonna point out a couple of about 4 things real quick. Public safety. There had been a troubling wave of violence in parts of our district, including several shootings involving young people. Most recently, I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, but there was a 7-year-old girl that was shot. Yeah. And with the shooters and suspects reported to be only 17 and 19 years old. This is deeply concerning to our community, and we are actively working to coordinate efforts with NYPD and Parks Department. And some of these shootings have actually occurred in the parks. 2 of them actually occurred in our parks. So additionally, we're drafting a resolution to address safety in these areas. We had our board elections this month. It was beginning of the month. We recently conducted that, which was handled professionally and without major issue. Yeah, so I know one of the chairs had mentioned about questions about how the boards do it. Anytime we want to chat, we can, because I was over the elections committee and what our process is now. It went smooth for the most part, but we had people running for chair, vice chairs, first vice chair, second vice chair. So Marquise won his bid. I won first chair, and we have a new second vice chair coming in as well. Board restructuring, we had spoken to Marquise about this in the upcoming months. We're exploring ways to restructure our board, including potentially combining 2 committees and launching a new committee to address emerging community needs. So look forward to dealing with that. Community events, lastly, our district recently celebrated holiday lights. We were at the reception that the borough president held, so we appreciate that. It was iconic. I think this year was the largest year as far as parade participation. And I do want to give it to you all. Your flow was exceptional. And we're also preparing our annual toy giveaway held in collaboration with School District 5. This event brings holiday cheer to children and families in our community and reflects the spirit of togetherness. So overall, Community Board 10 remains focused and committed as we head into the holiday season. On behalf of the chair, Community Board 10, we wish you all a happy and healthy holiday season and look forward to continuing our work together.
Thank you so much. CB10 also had a really good float. So
Last year was better.
We're gonna try to participate next year. We helped out.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah, we went through your area too. I think they expected.
we had full board. At the same time.
Oh,
yeah, the borough president went from the reception
to
to
our
our home, so it was a long night. All All right, I think with that, unless anyone has anything, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I have a quick question for everybody who does the 2-hour meeting.
Thank you.